There's a pattern that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel dangerous. It doesn't feel obvious. In fact, it usually feels normal. And that's exactly why it works. Because while you're living your life, responding to things, making decisions, something subtle is shaping you. And if you don't notice it, it can slowly change the way you think. Until one day, you don't feel like yourself anymore. It doesn't start big. There's no clear moment where everything shifts. It begins with small adjustments. You let something slide. You ignore something minor. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. And most of the time, it isn't. But the pattern isn't about one moment. It's about repetition. What you repeat quietly becomes what you accept. At first, nothing looks different. You still act like yourself. You still think like yourself. But then, small changes start to appear. You hesitate more. You second guess more. You pause before saying what you really think. Not because you have to, but because it feels easier. And when something feels easier, you repeat it. There's something your brain is always trying to do. Keep things stable. Avoid discomfort. So when a situation feels slightly tense, you adjust. You soften your words. You hold things in. You adapt to keep things calm. And again, there's nothing wrong with that on its own. But when that becomes your default, it starts shaping how you show up. This is where it gets harder to see because you're not losing something all at once. You're losing it gradually. A little clarity, a little confidence, a little honesty. Not enough to alarm you, but enough to change you. And gradual change is the hardest kind to recognize. After a while, what once felt different starts to feel normal. Not because it is, but because you've adapted to it. You don't question it as much. You don't notice it as much. And that's when the pattern settles in, but something inside you still reacts, even if you don't fully acknowledge it. A feeling of discomfort, a sense that something is off. And you try to ignore it because everything looks fine on the surface. But what you feel internally doesn't just disappear. Now, the pattern reinforces itself. No, you adjust. Things feel calmer, so you keep adjusting. And over time, that becomes your automatic response. Not speaking, not reacting, not pushing back. This is where it becomes deeper because now it's not just behavior, it's identity. You start to see yourself differently. I'm just someone who avoids conflict. I'm just someone who keeps things to myself. And those statements start to feel true, even if they weren't always true. At some point, you stop questioning it. You stop noticing the shift, and you begin to believe, this is just who I am. This is how I think. This is how I react. But what feels like identity might just be a pattern repeated long enough. So, what changes? Not the situation immediately, not the pattern instantly, but your awareness of it. You start noticing your pauses, you start noticing your hesitation, and once you see it, you can't fully unsee it. You begin to recognize. when you're adjusting unnecessarily, when you're holding back automatically, when you're choosing comfort over clarity. And slowly, something begins to change. Not dramatically, but steadily. You pause before adjusting. You question your automatic responses. And in those small moments, you begin to reconnect with yourself because the pattern was never loud. It never forced you. It never demanded attention. It just repeated itself until it felt like you. But now you see it. And that changes something. Not all at once, but enough. Because when you begin to see the pattern clearly, you don't just react the same way anymore. Because you're trying to change, but because you finally understand what was quietly shaping you all along. And this is where it becomes even harder to see. Because the pattern doesn't just change what you do, it changes how you process things. Your reactions, your interpretations, even your expectations. Your brain is designed to adapt, to make things easier, to make things predictable. So when you experience the same type of situation over and over again, your brain starts building shortcuts. This is how I should respond. This is what usually happens. And those shortcuts begin to guide your behavior automatically, not because you chose them consciously, but because they became familiar. There's something else that shifts: your emotional baseline. What once felt uncomfortable starts to feel normal. What once felt off now feels expected. And your reactions adjust accordingly. You don't respond the same way because it no longer feels the same. Over time, you become less reactive to certain things, not because they changed, but because you adapted. You notice less, you question less. And that reduced sensitivity makes the pattern even harder to detect. At some point, you begin anticipating things before they happen. You adjust your behavior before anything even occurs. You prepare your response. You soften your reaction. And it feels natural, even though it's something you learned over time. Now something subtle takes over. You start filtering your thoughts. Not everything you think becomes something you express. You edit yourself. You adjust your words. And eventually, that filter becomes automatic. The more you repeat these patterns, the more they reinforce your identity. You don't just act differently, you begin to believe differently. This is just how I am. This is just how I handle things. And the pattern feels permanent. This is where it becomes even more subtle. It starts to feel like you're choosing these behaviors. Like this is simply your preference. I'd rather stay quiet. I'd rather not react. But that choice might just be the result of repetition. Over time, there can be a slight disconnection between what you feel and how you respond. You feel something strongly, but react lightly. And that gap becomes familiar. But something changes when you start noticing that gap. When you realize, this isn't how I always used to be. This feels different. And that awareness goes deeper than before. Now you're not just seeing the pattern, you're seeing how it shaped you, how it influenced your reactions, how it changed your expectations. And in that moment, you start reconnecting with something. not something new, something that was always there, your original reactions, your original clarity, because the pattern didn't replace who you are. It just repeated itself until it felt like you. And once you see that clearly, you begin to realize something important. You're not becoming someone new. You're remembering who you were before the pattern. See you next tomorrow.